I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show, Hotel Mars, Episode N. It's a great pleasure to welcome George Whitesides, the CEO of Virgin Galactic. This requires very careful language. David Livingston, Dr. Space, the Space Show, will be joining me momentarily. But the careful language is about what the difference is between a very cool airplane ride and a suborbital ride. That's what Virgin Galactic is proposing for customers, paying customers, and also offering to experiments, suborbital experiments. George, a very good evening to you. You enjoy being the director of an entirely new kind of company. This is a company that you can start at an airport or on planet Earth and go suborbital. What does that look like, George? Good evening to you.
Good evening, John. It's great to be with you. Virgin Galactic is doing something that is fundamentally new, which is opening up spaceflight for the rest of us, right? So for 50 years, people, professional astronauts, have been going to space, but our aspiration is to radically open up space so that significantly more people can go. And what we're going to be doing is taking people on 2-hour rides that will start, at a spaceport on planet Earth, take them on a trajectory that will take them into space for a few minutes, about 5 minutes, and then come back down and land and train them to do that. So that's what we're trying to do. And
you have portals in your spacecraft that allow the customers to see back down on planet Earth. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. Everybody's got a window seat. In fact, everybody's got 2 window seats. We've got about 16 windows inside the vehicle.
David?
Good evening, John. Good evening, George. George, are you doing this with any government money, or is this all a private sector investment?
This is completely private, which is interesting, right? Because there are a lot of companies out there, many of which are doing great things, but they're doing it basically on government development funds. What we're doing is private money, and it's money from 2 places. We have an investor in Virgin Galactic, or from Virgin Group, rather, which is Richard Branson, and then we have a company called ABAR, which is a Abu Dhabi-based fund. And all the money has come from those 2 private enterprises. And so we are, trying to do it as a private investment, and we think that's an important thing.
The news has included a decision you made to switch from one engine to another engine. What does that mean, George, and what does it mean for the expectation of the commercial part of this to get customers in the air?
That's a great question, John. So I think an important thing is that we actually haven't changed the engine. What we've changed is a fuel grain within the engine. So our engine has been the same for 6 years, which is basically a hybrid engine. We use an oxidizer called nitrous oxide, and then we use a fuel grain. And we've been working with 2 fuel grains for the last probably 5 years. One is basically rubber, and the other one is a type of plastic. It's essentially a kind of nylon. And what we decided about a month ago was to go with the nylon for the final phase of test flights. And we think we're going to get somewhat better performance with that, somewhat higher apogee. Both of them were good, to be honest. We certainly had our challenges during the development program over the past years, but we think we have a good engine for our folks now.
And that engine has yet to fly the aircraft to 50 miles or so. It hasn't happened yet.
That's right. So to date, we've flown our carrier aircraft 149 times. We've flown the spaceship 28 times. In glide flight, and then we've flown it 3 times under powered flight. So we've gotten up to about 70,000 feet, which is pretty high. It's about double what you would go in a commercial airliner. But we still have a good way to go. We have to make it up to our aspiration is 100 kilometers, and so we'll rapidly go up though during the test flight program. Basically, the way it works is the first few flights you're trying to test as you go through Mach 1, and that's what we've been doing so far, and that's really important from an aerodynamic perspective. That's a critical milestone to get through. In some ways, Mach 1 is harder than Mach 3 because once you go supersonic, the behaviors are somewhat similar, but there's a lot of uncertainty around Mach 1. Now that we've demonstrated that with our vehicle, we feel more comfortable now about shooting up higher.
David?
George, the word is that passengers will be able to float free of their seats. Are you still going to be able to offer that? And how do they do that and still get back to their seats in time for reentry?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the things that distinguishes our vehicle is that it's big enough that people can get out of their seats. And so we have a huge cabin. It's going to be, probably the biggest cabin in existence in the spacecraft other than the space shuttle, which is obviously retired. And so people will be able to float around. They'll float around for a few minutes, maybe 3 minutes or something, 3 to 4 minutes, something like that. And actually, David, what we did was we took our entire cabin, took it apart, put it inside a parabolic plane, one of these things that does the weightless flights, reassembled it, and tested out how people get back into their seats. And it turns out that it's okay. It'll take a little bit of training, but we've already tested that, and we feel comfortable that we can do it safely.
There's a sidebar to your suborbital flights. I see that you're accepting, or are you still in the process of deciding that you're going to take experiments similar to what we know are on the space station? Is that true, George?
It is true, John, and it's a really exciting area for us. So we've basically sold a few different experiments. So one is NASA has bought like a charter flight, essentially, and we're going to be flying 12 experiments that NASA's picked, and they're mostly technology demonstration experiments or research. And there's some really exciting stuff, like 3D printing is really exciting in microgravity, and they want to bring that to the International Space Station. So we'll do that for NASA. We're basically just a service provider for NASA in that case. And then we've also sold a few spaces on board the flights to some other private investigators.
David?
So, George, also one of the really interesting things I understand is your totally pressurized cabin, no spacesuits, correct?
Yeah. There are pros and cons, but we think that first of all, we have massive reserves in our spacecraft for things like basically air. And so even if we had a huge hole in the side, we would be able to everybody would be okay. But what we've done is we've got this triply redundant cabin, and there are risks associated with spacesuits, because if you've ever done scuba diving or something like that, it's very similar actually. And if you have things, don't really like to talk about it, but if somebody were to throw up in their suit, that's actually a dangerous situation if you're not trained for it. So we felt on balance, because we have such sort of triple redundancy in our cabin itself, that it was actually safer for people to be in just sort of normal flight suits for their journey.
Spaceship Two, that's what we're looking at. Is there a timeline that you're working with every day? Do you go in and have a wall chart saying we're going to hit this, we're going to hit that, and here's our first flight? Does anything like that exist, George?
Yeah, John, we have, there's a lot of attention on our schedule, obviously.
Yeah, sure.
We have detailed schedules inside, but, we're in development, right? And that means, it's not like a 737 where that, you're going to be able to achieve X or Y. You have to sort of let things proceed at their own pace. And one of the things that I think we've proven is that we're not going to rush things. We're essentially in year 9 of this program. And, we don't have a company if we don't have a safe thing, and so we're going to take our time. We obviously have our internal dates. We have a internal milestone, basically, to fly Richard by the end of the year, and we're going to try to accomplish that. But we're going to take the time it needs, because ultimately we've invested a lot of money in this, and we're not going to rush it. I'm going to fly on this. My wife and I are going to fly on this. I don't know if you know this, John, but I was actually one of the first customers before I was an executive. All the way back in 2005, my wife and I bought 2 tickets on Virgin Galactic, because we believed that if we were going to have a chance to go to space, we're both space geeks, it was going to be with Galactic. And so, I'm not going to rush this, because a lot of the people that I care a lot about and all of our customer base are people that we are going to make a safe journey for.
David?
Any chance that once you start operations, we'll see prices come down, or will that take a while?
Richard's vision is really to decrease the cost over time. Right now it's $250,000, which is a non-trivial amount of money. But what I always like to say is that the only other way to buy a ticket to space right now is with the Russians, and they charge you $72 million, which is so obviously what we're doing is radically cheaper than that. But we want to go lower than that over time. I think what we have to do as a commercial enterprise is to amortize the cost of our development. First, that's really important, just as a private business. And then after we get through that, and we've sort of worked through things. We're halfway done with our next spaceship, so we'll add another spaceship in, and as we add capacity, just like any airline, we'll have the opportunity to bring those prices down over time.
Just a momentary, imaginary ticket to ride on Virgin Galactic Spaceship Two. How long would the whole flight take? You arrive at the spaceport, you get prepared, you go on board, and how long will you be in the air, including those 5 minutes in suborbital weightlessness?
It's about 2 hours, John, roughly speaking, maybe a little less. You'll get there like the week before, so we'll give you 3 or 4 days of training, and sort of how to move around the cabin, safety, emergencies. We'll train you on how to make the most of your time in space, and you'll get to know your crew. You'll get to know your pilots, and then you'll fly on the morning of the fourth day up to space.
The morning of the fourth day, is that what you said, George?
Yeah, that's correct.
David?
George, I understand that your Launcher 1 that is going to be used for launching experiments, are you partnering with Google on that, or can you clarify some of the news reports we've heard?
Well, I think the exciting thing is that we're building a new capability, which I think is going to radically transform how we put stuff up into space. Right now, most of the orbital launch vehicles that launch satellites are in the tens to hundreds of millions of dollars, right? So SpaceX, which has done amazing things in radically bringing down the price, is around $65 million right now. Ariane is $100 million or something. We're going to be able to offer something for less than $10 million, perhaps substantially less. And what we're seeing is enormous interest from folks like colleges, universities, new startups, all kinds of different companies that would love to be able to have that capability to launch these small sats, maybe nanosats, maybe picosats, but all the way up to sort of the size of maybe a small fridge. Right now, there's no way to do that in a dedicated fashion, and our Launcher 1 vehicle is going to be able to do that, and we're getting tons of interest from all over the place for that.
George Whitesides is the CEO of Virgin Galactic. David Livingston, Dr. Space of The Space Show. I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show.